Alright, time for another DraftPhysics.com video presentation. So, I will respond to a few more comments, but we'll do that after I do this part where I will now, for the fourth time, I think, explain why physicist Michael's experiments regarding conservation of kinetic energy were flawed. I'd say complete garbage. That seems the more obvious thing to say in the context. But we have to be we have to really try to be excessively polite or something, because everybody gets these butthurtness, and then decides that they can take it to the next level of insult. Blah 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 blah. But anyway. So I've tried in these videos, I've tried in every way to make the argument as concise and small as possible so they can pay some attention. I mean, even that fact that you have to do physics arguments in, Twitter bites is pretty foul and disgusting that somebody would think that makes any sense. That some of it's going to get complicated and you have to go through the little steps to be able to see big pictures and all of that kind of crap. You have to plant the forest of trees. Anyway, the fact is he allows all this crap on his comment section, a bunch of foul and disgusting rhetoric, where they think they can dismiss me and talk about me as if I don't exist or as if I haven't made all of these videos. So let's just understand the context. For 2 years, I've just made the simple request: draw a lever and explain how your scalar energy works. Okay, I mean, I'd love for somebody to just draw me a diagram of a scalar energy. How it's actually formed inside of anything, how anything possesses scalar energy. But anyway, alright, so physics Michael. So this is to you. I guess I'll time code it right to this spot. If that's what you have, that's what you require. Okay. So he does 2 experiments, okay? I mean, I did all this, but I have to do it again. Alright, and then 2 masses. Okay, and 2 mass. There. So there's 2 experiments, same exact spring. Okay, so the spring is compressed exactly the same amount in this experiment and in this experiment. The momentum, that is, if this was an explosion, I guess I have to explain this part. If it was an explosion and you wanted to measure how much the explosive created in joules of energy, well, what you do is you basically understand that the explosion goes this way, and the explosion goes that way, and it goes this way, and it goes that way. And what you do is try to calculate, well, how much energy went this way, and then you would say, well, the same amount went over here, and the same, so you could go 5 and 5 and 5 and 5, and then you do the round a circle, and you figure out how much density there was, how many of these little lines of force you could draw, and you'd calculate the whole thing based on understanding one vector. So obviously this is duplicating a kind of explosion just in 2 dimensions, and so it's a pretty simple process. This goes off with a momentum and this goes off with a momentum, and that's the total momentum created by the spring. It pushed both objects. Now if I made these walls so these sides can't move, then all the energy goes this way and you can just measure the momentum. So we could approximate that he did the experiment with this just being a wall, and that he got these results, and I'm going to draw the results, which don't make much sense, but here they go. Alright, so let's see, this has a 200, okay, of momentum. 100 this way, 100 that way. And this one, okay, creates 200 and 200 for 400. So it has a total momentum of 400. So the same spring compression in his experiment, that's explicitly how it came out, okay? I'm not lying or cheating, that's how his experiment came out. I mean, it's the only way he could make the argument that he did experiments where he conserved the kinetic energy from one experiment to the next. You got the same exact kinetic energy out of the spring. Well, the only way you could do it was by changing the momentum. Obviously, you've changed the masses. You have to change the momentum to be able to conserve the kinetic energy. All right. So those are the results he got. Now, my simple argument is that's not possible. Springs can't do that. Okay, they basically feel weight. They're compressed by weight and they push with weight. And it can't make different momentums unless something breaks down in the function of the spring, unless you've done something to screw it up in some way. And I'm not suggesting that's the case. I'm suggesting that the way he measures the velocity is what was broken, and therefore he got wrong velocity numbers, so it wasn't really these numbers. These numbers aren't any good. But anyway, the simple argument I'm making is you can illustrate how this can't have happened by just running the experiment reverse. So let's just say these were 50-mile-an-hour cars. Well, no, we don't want to do velocity change because we're doing a mass change, obviously. So let's just take it the way it is. Okay, these are twice as heavy objects, and well, it is a 2-to-1 relationship, right? So there's no way of getting around. The momentum is twice as much. So it's just basically saying you have an object, and now you're going to add double its velocity to create twice as much momentum. All right. I mean, it's twice as much momentum. And you can understand that if I did the experiment in reverse, that is, I compress the spring with 400 momentums, and I compress the spring with just 200, I'm not going to get the same compression of the spring back. So, I mean, the obnoxiousness to logic of his claimed experiment is kind of obvious. I mean, if I put a 2-mass going, I mean, it's just that simple, right? So if they have them going the same speed, and I double the mass to double the momentum, and I push it into the spring, there's no way the 2 can weigh the same amount as the 1. If this is going 2x the velocity, I mean, if it has 2x the mass, and I push it into a spring, it can't possibly compress the spring the same amount. I mean, I could more articulately say this, but I mean, you got to understand, this is like saying I can put, 5 pounds on a scale, or I could drop 10 pounds on the scale, and the scale says they weigh the same. That can't physically happen. I don't need to prove it any other way to say then you can't do this. You can't have different momentums and compress the spring the same amount. Momentums are essentially weight. I mean, I don't know, you don't want to concede the point, but I don't know how logically you escape that one either. But that's essentially what momentum is weight. And springs measure weight, and we know that. But they measure momentum, and it's clear that you can't do this. And I'm just saying that, okay, I've made this argument 4 times. You pay no attention to it, and you just, okay, I'm dismissing your experiment as shit without giving you an explanation. No, I've provided the explanation that it doesn't make any sense. He conserved momentum in the sense he argues he's conserving momentum because he has the same amount of motion going both ways in both experiments. But clearly it's the same spring in both experiments. This spring cannot produce these contrary amounts of momentum out. It can't do it. The same spring compression can't make 5, and it can't make 10. It can only make one of these. It can only make one amount of pressure. And so that's the frankly, glaring flaw. Okay, yes, you conserve momentum in each individual experiment, but clearly the spring isn't conserving the momentum. Clearly the same spring can't be producing these results. How many times do I have to say it, and how many ways do I have to say it? All right. So that's the argument that he has again ignored. And I don't know how to get him to not ignore arguments. I mean, he won't watch the videos because they're too long, which is kind of a diss. All right. I mean, somebody is bringing arguments to this table and saying, look, this doesn't work, and drawing it, and you don't have any obligation to counter it. Now, that's typical, okay, for 2 years. Again, I'll draw a lever later. Again, okay, for, I don't know, the 100th time. And point out how, where's your explanation? I mean, how do you make levers not conserve momentum? Where does it go, the momentum? How did you destroy the momentum? And as Piro concedes, there's really no point in you keep arguing that there's some law of conservation of momentum when none of you believe in it. I mean, it's just a joke. All right. So I don't, it's really impossible, this circumstance where they don't have to respond to anything I say or anything I draw. They can just quote mine a sentence and play their little games. I mean, it's, pathetic. Yeah, so we'll bring this back up. You really don't need it, but what the hell. All right. So some veggie tail guy, this is Farley, posted a link to my previous video where I do explain again that you just reverse your experiment, it doesn't work. It doesn't make any sense. Okay, 2 different momentums can't compress a spring the same amount. Can't happen. All right. So, instead of posting the video that was actually a response to this last comment. So he's conceding that there's some curiosity here and saying he's willing to do the experiment. That's all good. And I pointed that out in the video. So he doesn't post the link to that video, the one on the subject, frankly. All right. So the physicist Michael says, now this was a 2-hour video. I'm sure he didn't watch it all. So he just watched the one little clip, that's the context. You can immediately see DraftScience outright dismiss. So again, there's no outright dismissal. There's no blanket dismissal. There's no blank dismissal. There's a clear explanation of why I'm making this argument that you can't do what you claimed you did, which is get different momentums out of the same spring compression. It doesn't happen unless you're doing something radically wrong, like putting way too much compression into the spring or doing something to screw it up. All right. The results of my previous experiments. So what I'm doing is counter-arguing why your experiments were clearly a proof that kinetic energy is real and it gets the right answer. And I'm pointing out how, no, it doesn't, because your experiment can't possibly be what you say it did, can't possibly happen. Claiming without evidence. So again, he says this crap. And what's my evidence supposed to be exactly? I mean, you do a magic trick, okay, and I call it out, say, yep, trick, here, the pigeon's in your sleeve, and you what? Pretend I didn't point that out, or what do I have to do? Do I actually have to duplicate your trick? Why do I have to do any of that? Why can't I just say, look up his sleeve, there's a rabbit? I'm just saying, look, this can't be right? 2 different weights can't read the same on the scale. The scale I can't put 10 pounds on the scale and put 5 pounds on the scale and get the scale to move the same. It don't work that way. All right. Bad calibration, or that I did the experiment wrong. Yes, I explained it can't possibly be consistent with what we know to be really good laws of physics. Though it's fairly simple experiment. Yeah, it is, but it doesn't change anything. The fact that an experiment is simple doesn't mean people can't, cheat. And it seems a coincidence. So from his perspective, it's a coincidence. It's not a coincidence that we only see experiments that come out the way you want them to. And if they don't come out the way you want them to, you figure out, oh, there's something wrong. But you never figure out there could be something wrong in the ones that come out the way you want them to. And we could go all the way to the extreme of Professor Lewin doing his demonstration, where it seems obvious for demonstration purposes, he rigged the experiment. that the idea was scrambled in just the way to show great matching with principles of energy and momentum taught in any physics class. So they teach in physics class that 10 pounds can weigh 5 pounds. That heavy guys crashing into a spring, 100-mile-an-hour crash compresses the spring the same amount as a 50-mile-an-hour. That's how dramatic the difference is. The difference is gigantic. There's twice as much momentum in the second experiment. The same spring produced twice as much explosion. It's a pretty dramatic difference, frankly. So these kind of stupid, insulting, kind of patronizing nonsense that, oh, this is standard physics and we've proven it, and we've proven it, and we've proven it, Yeah, we've been there and done that. He thinks the experiment is wrong because, okay, capital, it doesn't match his conclusions. So again, no, that's not why it's wrong. It's wrong because it has a glaring break of common sense in it. I mean, it just can't work that way. The same dynamite can't produce twice as much pressure or half as much pressure. It can't work that way. Okay, which is not how science works. So again, this is the problem with science. These people who don't know how are teaching, right? Sorry, no sale. You obviously don't care much about how science should work. And I pointed it out. Again, he's heard me say these words. I mean, you've had 350 years to produce a little bit of direct, solid evidence that takes 4 times the fuel to go twice as fast, and you can't find a single piece of linkable data that you can show me, showing somebody pouring 4 times the fuel in to get twice the velocity. You can't show it. I mean, I've gone through all the other stuff. I mean, this is levers. You have never tested a lever to find out what it produces on the other side. I mean, these are glaring omissions, and you pretend that's how science should work. We just tell you, okay, the guy in the defendant chair is guilty, and you just believe us. We don't have to prove anything. All right, and then immediately follows up with a litany of insults. Yeah, because I'm frankly, you started it as far as I'm concerned. Your arrogance and your patronizing attitude is insulting. I mean, frankly, it's just, why should I take this crap from you? All right, I made real arguments, and you evaded every single one of them. Every single question I posed, you perverted into a new subject. So, yeah, fuck you. Having questions about how physics, see, again, it's questions. See, you're not allowed to have disagreements. You can only have questions. You can only ask them. Please, disciple of the Christ, please explain to me your experience with the Christ. But you can't say, could you show me some evidence of your, this crap you're talking about? No, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to question the bullshit that they spew. Having questions about how physics and these various physical concepts work, right? So again, these are the teachers. Yeah. No sale. And are applied to different systems is great. Yes, ask me questions so I can tell you the truth and I don't have to prove any of it. And if if you ask me for some proof, what I'll do is I'll produce this, production experiment, and yeah, it can have glaring flaws in it that make absolutely no sense, and I'll just keep defending it, because that's good science. Good science is ignore the critics and just keep pumping the propaganda. I encourage your viewers to grow a brain and realize that this guy's just talking the same crap that they've never proven, and he's never given an answer. He won't answer the simple question, why in 350 years haven't you incidentally or even by accident videotaped taking 4 times the fuel to go twice as fast. And again, their physics says that if I lift 100 pounds really slowly, I'm doing the same amount of work that I would do if I lifted it really quickly. That's what their physics says. Because they think lifting is about how many inches. They don't think lifting is about how much time you had to support the force. You had to counter the force. I mean, their physics is fundamentally and elementally, in elemental ways, just absolute nonsense. Okay. Who have questions? So he said questions are good. I encourage his viewers who have questions to reach out and ask questions. Please tell me, Physicist Michael, because I'm too stupid to do reasoning and logic, and I can't pay any attention to the subject. Gary drew a lever and completely confused me. Please explain to me how it works. I mean, this is pathetic, and he won't do it. And I hope they'll consider my responses and experiments I'm setting up. So I'm making the accusation that clearly you don't scrutinize your experiments very carefully, and you have a glaring error in the one you already did. So look, I could go back to his dropping mass experiment where he totally ignored momentum as a theory of its motion, and did all of his analysis by just ignoring time as a factor in the acquisition of the energy to move the cart. So it was also a crap experiment in the sense the experiment wasn't wrong, but the analysis was bent. But this clip is a great example of a dishonest interlocutor. So, it's a, again, another insult. I mean, I'm obviously not doing anything dishonest. For 2 years, I just honestly say, please draw the lever and explain how it works. And no one will do it. No one. I hope he changes his approach. No, I'm not going to become one of you. I'm the one dealing with all the crap and actually responding to it. They're the ones that ignore every single argument made. All right. So then the Gosling retard chimes in. Dear Michael, okay, I've been building demonstrations for months. It's a stick, okay, with a hole in the middle. Anyway. And let's just understand, his most recent challenge was to me, he titled the video, the end is nigh or something, as if he was going to prove me wrong. And he totally weaseled out. He said, Gary, give me your prediction. Ha 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 ha. I've got you now. Ha 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 ha. And, he made this whole mocking video as if he's got the goods. Alright, and he challenged me to make my prediction. I gave him the appropriate prediction, which was exactly the prediction I had the week before, except I just added the qualification that, we now know that, gravity is pushing also on the mass, so you have to subtract the weight of the object when you're doing an experiment with springs in gravity. There's the velocity and the mass component, the movement part, and then there's the weight part. It just weighs. The 10 pounds, I don't have to move it to make it weigh 10 pounds. So I have to subtract that, 10 pounds, and just to understand that the weight I'm going to get as an impulse is going to include both the weight of the object and its momentum. And so I just have to subtract its weight to get the momentum number. Now, because I made that tiny qualification, he completely bails out and doesn't do the experiment. Why? Because, yes, he already knew the results and he knew I was right. And he didn't want to show me to be right. I mean, obviously, if he thought I was still wrong, if my prediction was wrong, why wouldn't he do the experiment, right? I mean, he still wins. So it seems to me kind of obvious he must have done the experiment and he already knew the results. And he realized, that prediction is correct. So anyway, DraftScience has made excuses. So what, you talk about excuses. You claim you have the goods, you're going to do the experiment, and then you weasel out after somebody does exactly what you said you wanted. Predict it. Tell me what you think will happen. Don't be mushy about it. Give me your prediction, and I'll prove you wrong. And then he weasels out. I mean, this bum can make these arguments? No, come on. Let's see. He has made excuses to rubbish these efforts at every attempt. Yes, well, every bit of your focus is to, again, show things that disprove me. Okay, you're not showing anything else, just like Brozo. And so you're only seeing the flaws in the experiments that don't come out your way. And those are the only ones you're going to publish. Those are the ones you're going to make a video about. So, I mean, your bias is grotesque. Okay. Please be careful in your interaction. So why does somebody have to be careful? What exactly is... why am I a giant threat? I'm not invading anybody's privacy. I'm not doxing people. I'm not doing all the shit you were doing. Your gang has to resort to. I'm certainly not publishing photos of your family. I mean, you disgusting pieces of shit. So, I mean, geez. So he has to be careful of what am I going to do in the interaction except make a response video and say, gee, you just weaseled out and didn't pay any attention to what I actually said. And that's exactly what I've done. I mean, I've done the spaceship thing, I've done the guns and the bullet thing, I've done all of these arguments, and he hasn't paid any attention to any of them. Okay. With him, and avoid having your energy harvested. So again, this is, I guess, some sort of thing they believe in. The living force. He's gonna hurt your soul. So, and he says he is a maniac. Yeah, by what definition? Exactly what is maniac? Maniac is I draw a lever and for 2 years I request somebody to respond by redrawing it the correct way. And nobody will do that. So I'm a maniac. Fuck. Such dishonesty. Alright, so he responds to this pathetic liar. Okay. I've been planning to make these kinds of videos for a while. So again, these kinds of videos are just standard out of the textbook experiments. Okay, nothing new here. Nothing challenging, nothing enlightening in some new way, no new ingredients added at all. This is just an old frickin' biscuit recipe. Just going over physics concepts with demos and scientifically critical thinking. So there's no scientific critical thinking in anything he's doing, right? He's not pointing out how, well, there is this problem with momentum and kinetic energy and that they're in direct conflict in terms of their answers, and you really can't conserve both if you change the mass. He doesn't even understand that, right? Because he did an experiment where he basically ignored the fact that he's getting different momentums out of the same spring. Okay, so this is actually not bad push to make me keep producing them. So he thinks he's clarifying by propaganda, and that's it. So, you know, there's nothing good about that as a theory of function. You've ignored, somebody's challenged you and said, I think you're making mistakes. I think you don't understand. Yeah, some of these words are going to be insulting. I'd be insulted if somebody tells me I don't understand. I spend 2 years studying a subject and some moron is going to tell me I don't understand the subject. Yeah, I do. As I've already stated to you, I know more about the history of kinetic energy than you do. So you might have a doctorate in physics. Doesn't matter, I still know more about this subject than you do. I'm also specifically not referring to DraftScience in the videos. Yes, which is a specific insult to DraftScience. Like I said, you could make unlisted videos and actually respond to these subjects too. Okay, you don't have to make these production videos. You could just engage in the argument in some more constructive way. And you've chosen not to. Though I'm not trying to disprove his specific points. You're claiming you have disproven them. So this is just more lying. I'm not, frankly, clearly you're claiming you can dismiss my arguments and in my opinion, an experiment that's completely fake in the analysis. You didn't prove that gravity wasn't a time-dependent force. You just stated it because you didn't do the analysis. You didn't measure the free fall time. You didn't make the time comparison. Hopefully, wider audience at some later time doesn't need to sink into all that drama. So again, the drama is frankly your fault. The drama is only a consequence of the fact that you won't play by the rules of reasonable argument. Somebody makes a challenge, you answer the challenge. You don't keep evading the challenge. And all you've done from the beginning is evade, and that's what every other physicist has done. And even when I say I'll pay you, okay, not to evade the subject, you won't name your price. They can just view these as examples. So that's all I can do, is you're seeing the example. So people say I believe in a conspiracy. Well, the conspiracy is the bad character of scientists, right? I mean, they are just as weaselly as Donald Trump. I mean, they'll just play a game to evade the subject and avoid having to do what they're supposed to have done, which is proven their theory. So they haven't proven it, they haven't demonstrated it with evidence, and when you require them, you ask them to, they find some way to weasel out. Let's see, they can just view these examples of testing physical systems. So again, the argument made is your tests are broken, and you're just ignoring that argument, dismissing that argument, instead of addressing that argument. Whether or not DraftScience honestly considers the content of my videos, I'm not making them for him. So, yeah, clearly you're not, because you're frankly not doing experiments that I'd say were relevant, and second, you're not doing them well. Let's see, I've checked out some of your videos. Okay, so he's watched some of these disgusting videos by Gosling, and I think they're really good short demos. Really good short demos of what? Like his launching experiment with the springs that aren't even tied together, okay, not secured to the ground, and clearly claiming he's now proven, okay, that somehow the spring can't make something go twice as fast. Something half the mass can't go twice as fast. Especially like the friction and velocity experiment. I don't know which one was friction and velocity, but clearly that's a really important one. That's the rolling object argument, and that one's Galilean, so you're just denying Galilean physics. And the two ways of predicting the balanced oscillation. Oh, so there's two ways. I'm not going to watch his videos until he mans up and does his experiment that he weaseled out of. Alright, so I stated, please quote anything I said that was dishonest in my video. So he said I'm a dishonest interlocutor. So will they answer the question and quote the parts that were dishonest? No. Now you could say the rude parts, or you could say something else, but dishonest is a retarded accusation to make. I mean, this is how clueless they are about this engineering thing and logic thing, that they think calling me dishonest can make some sort of sense somehow, when obviously that's not what I am. I'm not dishonest. I viscerally react. Yes, I'm a person. And the fact is, because you're not insulted by arrogance and patronizing teachers, I am. Okay. Especially, like I said, when I spent 2 years immersed in a subject, and then some guy who's spent 10 minutes is going to tell me what the truth is. Yeah, I don't think so. My denial of your experiment came with an explanation. So clearly I didn't just deny it. I didn't just say it's bad experiment. I explained why it's a bad experiment. I explained that there's a glaring flaw. Again, if you can tell me how you didn't just prove in your experiment that 10 pounds weighs 5 pounds. That's what you just proved. 10 pounds weighs the same as 5 pounds. I'm saying, yeah, I have a right to say, right on its face, that experiment can't be worth anything. you can't have possibly proven that 5 pounds weighs the same as 10 pounds. That can't happen in this physical universe is a fair statement in light of your claim. Let's see. Any velocity I add to an object hitting a scale will increase the spring's compression. So everybody should be able to agree that if I'm pushing a spring and I add velocity to a mass, the spring has to compress more. Your experiment showed the same spring compressing, producing vastly different total momentums. As I stated, if you reverse the experiment, that is, you try to recompress the spring with the energy you released, you push the explosion back the other way, you're not going to get the same size dynamite. And plow the objects into the spring with the velocities and masses you stated they had. So these were, again, I'm honestly stating, I'm accurately paraphrasing his video, what was in it. Okay. Producing vastly different momentums. Your experiment showed the same spring compression producing vastly different momentums, twice as much. It was actually more than twice as much momentum in the second case because he added more than twice the mass. As I stated, if you reverse the experiment and plow the objects into the spring with the velocities and masses you stated they had, they could not possibly compress the spring the same amount. 10 pounds can't weigh 5 pounds. Okay, the first experiment with the lighter objects being pushed by the spring produced less than half the total momentum. So we're talking about the total momentum. That is, stuff went this way, stuff went that way. That's real motion in the universe. That's how you calculate how much energy the spring produced. Again, if I did it on a brick wall, then the object would have gotten all of the energy. But regardless, it still would have been a 2-to-1 relationship. The twice as much momentum in the case of the twice as heavy object, which can't physically happen. Okay. The spring produced less than half the total momentum of your second experiment with the same spring compression. Springs within their working range cannot produce different amounts of momentum. So unless you're doing something wrong in an experiment, the spring will release its momentum. It'll release an amount of energy that's consistent with weight and pressure and momentum. And momentum proves it. I mean, you can't make an argument that springs don't detect momentum. I add a P to a scale, it weighs an amount. I add a second P, it weighs a certain amount. I weigh a third P, it weighs it's perfectly consistent. And if I push with a little extra force, I'm going to definitely cause the scale to compress more. I can't evade velocity and mass incrementally affecting a scale. That's exactly what a spring senses, is increases in mass or velocity. Your experiment can't be, by well-established physical laws, a reliable illustration of the truth. So, we don't have a response to that comment. And we'll see if we get one. That's all we can do. But regardless, it was a very positive step that he said he's going to do these experiments, okay, with the lever. So at least that's a plus, okay, that he's put something on the line in the sense that he's making an argument that somehow he's going to show the lever failing to conserve momentum, which is a rather bold assertion in light of what conventional other teachers teach. The other teachers teach that you have to conserve momentum. And he's going to say that a device as simple as a lever or a gear, that these devices are terribly inefficient and that you lose a lot of energy, momentum energy. Yeah, that's a pretty bold statement, frankly. Very bold. So regardless, I don't make these videos for PhysicistMichael. I make these videos to have an argument, okay, about what people should believe and whether they should believe propaganda that's not evidenced, or whether they should believe, by incremental increase in their knowledge, more and more experiments. And the simple truth is they stop doing experiments when, somewhere, in the, say, 1700s, experiments weren't important anymore, and all you wanted is somebody to pontificate and tell you what the truth is with some mathematical formula. You didn't want to see it anymore. Seeing wasn't believing. You could say in 1740, when they were dropping round things into clay, that smart physicists would have known, well, that's a bullshit experiment. But unfortunately, that didn't happen, and they all fell for it. One experiment, one crappy experiment. It's just as simple as the rolling argument. You can just point out where you can figure out how it doesn't work. It's not a good way to detect the energy. Alright, so I've done that argument so many times. Has anybody countered my argument, my theory, okay, that rolling things on the ground doesn't evenly take the energy because it doesn't evenly push into the friction? Has anybody countered that? Pirro's essentially agreed with it, but what use is the agreement when he refuses to accept what that means, which is that, yes, gravity is a time-dependent force. Alright. I mean, this is just such, it's such crap. And it doesn't have to be this crap, but it's the fact that, again, what is a reasonable response when you've spent 2 years requesting something so simple and they won't do it? Alright, so we'll draw the lever one more time and such. Alright, back. Yeah. Something fell somewhere in the universe. Alright, so maybe I'll pause. Alright, sometime later, yes, I have returned. Alright, so the lever, and close enough. Alright, so the experiment would be, the idea is pretty simple. Okay, you just use the stick with the fulcrum, and let's just say we put any old mass in at a velocity. Okay, so that would be a weight or a momentum. Okay, and it's going to hit the lever. So, and this is nothing over here. Well, then we would expect that this lever will just move out of the way, okay, this direction, and this mass will continue on its way, having lost some tiny bit of its momentum. Okay, so its momentum will be put into the spinning of the lever, the rotation, the velocity of whatever the mass of the lever is. So the idea is to make the lever very small in terms of its weight compared to the masses or the momentum of the objects you're going to measure. So as long as there's a pretty high differential, you shouldn't lose much. 1%, small percentage, 1%. Okay, so that's step one, is getting a lever that doesn't steal too much of the energy. So it's a minor player in what's going to happen. And that's step number one. And step number two is to understand that if I do create one of these levers, and I put a 2 mass here, and I put a 2 mass here, the same distance, that it will balance, that it will oscillate, conserving the momentum. So it will oscillate. If it's a good lever, it can oscillate in gravity for quite a long time. Now, pretend we're looking down at this, okay? And this is horizontal, okay? So I'm just moving an object into the lever. Now I suggest using pendulum weights, where you can standardize how high you put the weight and then swing it, knowing that 4 times the height is only twice the velocity, and that you use that to swing, okay, the weights into the lever, okay, and be able to push objects that are, and be able to create an exchange. And all you're really saying is you're going to have energy coming in and you're going to have energy leaving, and the two are going to match. So this is very conservative. You have a very little energy consumed by the lever and the fulcrum, and it basically will just cause whatever I put in here, force here, will equal force here minus 2%, some percentage, some small percentage. All right, and that's how the thing works. That's the expectation. That's what everybody, I think, through their existence here on Earth understands to happen. Okay, and so the only change we're making is that instead of the 2 mass will come in here. Doesn't really matter what we put in over here. What we're going to change is we're going to put a 1 over here. Okay, so we're going to put it twice the distance, and as you increase this distance, the law of the lever basically says that there's a Hooke's law kind of relationship, a linear relationship, that you're going to get twice the velocity at twice the distance. So how much the lever moves here, this amount will be twice as much, and this amount will be twice that much. So it just keeps increasing based on distance. And what it means is that this object now weighs the same as this. So it will, in gravity, it will balance perfectly. I could put a 1/4 weight out here. No, 1/2 weight out here, which would be 1/4 of this weight, and it'll also balance. And so the idea is from this perspective of the lever, this side of the lever, okay, it just sees the weight. It doesn't see the mass. It sees the weight. So when you press here, I can change how much force this side feels, or I can feel the same force by just putting smaller and smaller. So if I have the 2 mass here, okay, it will weigh the same as the 1 mass here, and the 1/2 mass 4 units of distance. Right, so you probably can't even see that. Oh yeah, you can see enough of it anyway. So I could have a 1/4 mass way out here, I mean a 1/2 mass, sorry, 4 units of distance away, and all of these will weigh the same from the perspective of the lever. So pushing on it theoretically is the argument, because we don't have the proof, that no one's done the blind, double-blind experiment of testing to see if human beings could actually feel the difference. But the 2 mass here, the 1 mass here, the 1/2 mass here would all weigh the same. They'd all apply the same resisting force. That this one doesn't have any more inertia. It actually has less inertia because its mass is less. And this one even has less inertia because it weighs even less. I mean, mass is less. Alright, so that's the idea. And, the simple argument is that if I drop the 10-ton train, okay, going 5 miles an hour, okay, 5 velocity, that in fact, okay, I could put the 5-ton train, the 1/2 mass here on the lever, okay, and the idea would be is it's going to conserve the momentum. The weight won't be any different. It would be just like a 10-ton train sitting here, the 5-ton train sitting here. That side of the lever can't tell the difference. It's going to move exactly the same. So if you say a 10-5 makes a 10-5, you have to concede that a 10-5 makes a 5-10. The velocity will be 10, minus a tiny bit for the losses to the lever. Now some might argue that the fulcrum can tell the difference. There's no evidence it has any such vision. The signal has to go through the metal through the lever to convey this force, this weight that you've placed on it, this resistance to this motion. The thing resisting the motion is the weight of the object. It has to be pushed out of the way. This has to push this out of the way. And if you concede that it'll push here with 10-5 pressure, you have to concede it'll push here with 5-10. If it's 10-5 here, it's 5-10 here. Alright. So let's say we did have a fulcrum. So we could actually put the fulcrum on a scale, okay, and measure the difference. Well, the problem is now our test is entirely creating movement. We're allowing the whole lever to move. By allowing the lever to move, we're going to absorb the energy of the object. So now we're not going to get the same results in the experiment because we're losing the force in the spring. So that really won't work. Your test is going to ruin the experiment. So you can't really test for the pressure. But theoretically, there's no rational argument, I don't think, any reasoning that somebody can apply that somehow when the 10-5 hits here, that somehow it knows a 5 is over here and it loses some energy here. It can't tell the difference. 10-5 here or 5-10 there, right? 10-5 here or 5-10 here. Can't tell the difference. So that's the simple argument, and the very fact that this will in fact leave with 5-10 and twice as much kinetic energy means the kinetic energy theory, 1/2 mv squared, is a failure. Now, it failed, again, I'll do the history one more time, the history they won't touch. Alright, that this was Leibniz's invention in like 1668. He proposed this, and in 1669 or whatever it was, Newton presented the Principia. It might be 80. So just change those to 8s. Anyway, so a year later. So before 9.8 meters per second was understood to be a gravitational, based on the gravitational constant that Newton discovered, and that's a time-dependent ratio of 9.8 per 1 second, not 1 foot. So Leibniz still kind of thought gravity was about feet. All right, but that's all. It's momentum at its core. The only real thing is momentum, and this is just a contrivance. So just understand too, when it was first proposed, there was no half in front of it, so it did get really wrong answers. You know, way too high. Now it was way too high. Now it's still way too high in terms of the wrong answers. There's no reason for this. It just doesn't. Momentum perfectly explains how these physical objects work, and that it's basically velocity is something objects carry, and mass carries it. So you can give masses, okay, you can coat them with velocity, essentially, and you can give them, you know, a lot of velocity or a little. You know, I can give them just a little bit, or I can give a big velocity. So it's like amperage and voltage, and the two work together to create wattage, and the same is true for energy. The two, mass and velocity, work together to create joules of energy or watts of energy. This works. So let's also understand the history. There wasn't any glaring circumstance that just screamed, we need a new formula. MV worked. It explained just about everything well, and there wasn't anything that looked broken in how it explained it. So there wasn't any need to fix MV. It wasn't broken. They didn't fix a broken theory. They broke a fixed theory. Alright, so they won't explain how this scalar energy works. You know, I can plead with them, please explain to me, okay, this has some special scalar energy in it of some kind. I don't know what it is or where it's hiding, but it's in there. Some sort of energy that isn't directly related to its mass and velocity. And somehow its velocity squared means something. And that somehow, okay, this 10-5 isn't going to make the 5-10. Let's just reverse this, right? Because their theory basically says if I do this the opposite way, okay, and I drop the 5 mass, okay, going 10 here, their prediction of kinetic energy says I could lift with that energy a 20 mass twice the distance. So I could go twice the distance and I could lift a 20 mass and make it go 5. That would have the same kinetic energy as this. So if I want to conserve the kinetic energy, I can take a 5 going 10, and I can convert it into a 20 going 5. Now, do you think that works the other way around? No. I mean, come on. How silly does it have to get? All right. So there won't be any response. There won't be any argument explaining how anything I said here was wrong, outrageously stupid, logically creating contradictions and paradoxes, and all of physics will. Well, the fact is that yes, it will blow up all of physics, yes, but it is the true part of physics, and all of their unevidenced crap, the crap they can't prove. The crap in 350 years they haven't produced a single bit of really compelling, simple experimental evidence demonstrating ever that it takes twice the energy, twice the fuel to go 4 times as fast. That are defending Ian Gosling's moronic argument that 2 units of force equal 4 units of energy. So. Alright, leave it there and such. So we'll see how this progresses. I wish that a physicist would be honest and accept criticism and acknowledge his obligation to defend his theory. But they don't really acknowledge they have any obligation to defend what they say, and then they produce, in this case, what he thinks is evidence, and the evidence is grotesquely tainted. I mean, it's grotesquely tainted. I mean, you can't produce this same spring, okay, can't weigh 10 pounds and say it weighs the same as 5 pounds. It can't do that. Alright, so enough of a video.